Putting together a presentation is more than a series of slides. It's
How are you taking them on a journey? People love to be on journeys.
If you don't love yourself and love your story, you will never be able to tell it effectively.
Hi everyone. If you know me, you might know that I grew up in a Portuguese household. The back and forth struggles between American and Portuguese translation were daily. I was relieved to enter the American workforce. I thought the language divide would just vanish once and for all. Boy, was I wrong. I found new chasms of misunderstanding that needed bridges. There were divides between experience levels, industries, company cultures, and worldviews. These new challenges led me to seek help from the experts. One of my favorite books was Alan Alda's If I Understand You, Would I Have This Look on My Face? I discovered that this beloved actor had dedicated part of his life to helping scientific experts communicate with the rest of us. That led to the formation of the Alan Alda Center for Communicating Science at the Stony Brook University. One of the lecturers, and I would risk to say one of the superstar lecturers, has agreed to join us today. And I'm very excited to talk to him. Josh Rice, welcome. How are you today?
Hi, Mike. Thank you. That is a lofty title, superstar lecturer, which I do try to live up to in my facilitation of these workshops with Alan's curriculum. So it's really lovely to be here and lovely to talk to you about this.
Thank you. I'm a little biased. So let's go back a while. We'll get to the Alan Alda Center in a second and the work you do there.
Sure.
But where did you grow up, and how did you come into communication? Who were the storytellers in your life?
I grew up in a tiny town in western New York State between Buffalo and Rochester called Perry, Perry, where there are more cows than human beings. It's very dairy-centric there and very a lot of farmers and farms. And my family did not come from that background. And in terms of how communication became a part of my life, I grew up a lot with my mom and comedy. I really gravitated toward her sense of humor, which tended to be, pretty dark.
Really?
Which I not in a way that is negative toward my mom. I think she just has a view of the world that's very acerbic and real and honest, and I always appreciated that.
I like to tell people that I grew up in a Portuguese Catholic home, and so the fatalism was everywhere, and they would say things like, "Bye, Mom, I hope you have a good day," and she's like, "God willing." And I'd always be like, what is God going to do to you while I'm gone?
Exactly. Well, but same. My mom was also brought me up Catholic, for my first 15 years until I was like, I'm going to pass on this.
Right.
So, there's that balance of scripture, rules, church, and then also there's some other parts of this that, we can look at a little bit more critically maybe, or in this comic lens, this humorous lens. And, I think I really found a lot of that through my mom. My dad was also a real ham bone jokester, still is. They both still are. So those were kind of my
jokes.
first introductions to that sort of thing. Yeah.
And so what was your path to getting into the theatrical world?
I think a little bit of it was, I'm a firstborn. I'm also a Leo, which my wife will tell me says a lot about who I am as a person and makes a lot of sense for who I am as a person.
Right.
But I think a little bit of it was trying to find my own way as a firstborn. I didn't have any elder siblings to look to or to learn from, as a lot of my friends did.
Oh, okay.
So I think I was trying to figure out a little bit of what is my thing? What do I like? What should I like? What should I be into? And there wasn't really a theater program in my school, but my Spanish teacher, Bill Heller, who I still am very good friends with till this day, we call him Senor.
Nice.
And Senor would in his way of helping us learn how to speak Spanish better, would have us come up in front of the class and do these skits. And I guess I always like embraced that as like an opportunity to be funny or like try something a little outlandish. So we would bring costumes sometimes. No other students were doing this. Yeah. No other students were doing that. So we would have a lot of fun.
I could just imagine your teacher being like, this kid might be good for acting in theater.
Yeah. He wasn't wrong there. And that I think kind of gave me this like outlet to like try things out. And then like the school would have pep rallies. So like I would sign up for the performance aspects of that. Right. So eventually I made my way to college and I got introduced to the school's improv team. And I always watched Whose Line Is It Anyway? Saturday Night Live. Comedy was a big part of my life. And I saw improv kind of happening in front of me and thought, that is the thing that I want to do.
That was the thing, huh?
It wasn't until college, really, that theater kind of got introduced to me as a possibility, and improv specifically kind of being the driving force of like, yes, being clever in the moment on your feet. That to me felt like the thing. And then, of course, the whole world of it opens up to you when you realize it's a lot more than those things. But I think that was my initial draw to it.
I gotcha. And so what theater, what college did you go to?
I went to a SUNY school, State University of New York, in Brockport, which is just outside of Rochester. It had a theater program, which I originally wasn't even a major in, and wasn't what drew me there. But it was this honors program that was multidisciplinary. And it took like 4 of your gen ed courses and smashed them into one.
Oh, wow.
So it allowed you to graduate quicker, and it made you have to have 3 internships, one in your between your freshman or your first year and second year, and then another one between second and third year, and then another final one before you graduate. And they stressed that they needed to be international, especially in that third one. And for me, that was kind of the thing where I was like, I have to travel? Yeah. Yes, sign me
Please,
up.
Right?
Please help me get away from this place where, I didn't do a lot of traveling. We would go to Canada because that was close. But otherwise, we really didn't do a lot of traveling in my family. So those opportunities, I think, really drew me to this school.
Okay, cool. And so then how did you find that your interest in theater and helping people to speak about technical topics intersected? Where did that happen?
Many years later, I was performing. I was an intern at Shakespeare's Globe Theater. That's where I got to have my internship, which was incredible.
Whoa, in the UK?
In the UK, yeah, in London.
Wow, yeah.
So very formative for me and kind of showed me the breadth and scope of what theater could be, especially in London, such a hive of it. So then I came back to the States. I got involved in improv in a more serious way at my school, but then at the local regional theater in Rochester. And then I moved to Arkansas.
Oh, okay.
Of all places.
Another rural area.
A super rural area. And the state of Arkansas, the shape of it is also the shape of the county that I grew up in. So it's very bizarre how similar those places are in so many ways. But I went there because a friend of mine in the improv group got a job working for a children's theater company that had, it was like a 10-month contract. So I was like, paid theater work for 10 months. Yes, I'm in a new place. Again, this idea of travel always interested me. So like, let's go. Started an improv troupe down there. But to supplement my income, I started working at the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences. And they had a program that I did in Rochester at the University of Rochester at first that was called Standardized Patient Programs, where you take on the role of a patient in a healthcare setting and then a training physician, depending on their year in med school, will come in and they'll try to work with you as if this is like a real doctor-patient scenario and then you play the role. And then afterward, you give them feedback on how it went. And then I went to the next level of that, which was a physical teaching associate professional, meaning I learned how to do like a neurological exam or a cardiovascular exam or a pulmonary exam, all the different things that doctors have to do to an actual patient. I learned the physical techniques and then the things that you should say and should not say. And then would work with these training physicians.
So you should never say, I've never seen that before. Yeah.
Yeah. Or like, this seems like maybe you're going to die. You know, things like that, where you want to be like a little careful about how you compassionately communicate with a patient who's always, you know, in a vulnerable state when they come to visit a physician. So that was like my first real go at technical expertise, especially physical and anatomical terminology.
Right.
And then how you get these folks to be able to, one, do the maneuver to you properly, but then two, to be able to talk about it in the simulated way. So they're getting a chance to practice and then get some feedback on the ways that they're communicating. So that was my first foray into any of this work, which then I think, 20 years later is how I ended up at the Alda Center, because I think that experience in the medical setting, I think, set me apart in some ways because I already kind of was working with them in that way.
I love origin stories. I love that. That's great. I want to dissect that a little, because my first exposure to the highly scientific mind was working at the Gillette laboratory. They have a laboratory for personal care products. And all of a sudden I realized, whoa, what a culture shock. I mean, these guys are on a whole other level, talking a whole other language. What was the integration like for you? What was the entry like for you when you were facing doctors and interacting with them? Did you feel a culture shock that was similar or not? Did you glide right in?
I think what felt nice about the program was I felt almost like an equal to them in some ways, because I had something that they needed, which was practice.
Yeah.
And I could give them feedback that was useful in the moment for the ones that are like there, like, of course, every student comes at these things differently, but you could tell the eager students who knew this was practice. You could also tell the students that were terrified and not sure what to do when faced with a particular part of the human anatomy sometimes, and how to continue being a professional person in that particular setting. Gotcha. Mostly the things that I think we were trying to help them the most with were, what is just like a human-to-human interaction like? Are you saying your name when you walk in the room? Are you remembering to wash your hands? Right. Are you asking good questions and like really listening to the patient, who more or less will lead you to what's wrong if you listen to them, as opposed to coming in hard with what you think you know based on the notes you received before you walked in the room? So, and these were training physicians too. So we were the same age. So I think a little bit of that is what made us feel, I think, comfortable with each other. And I would tell them always, I am not a doctor. Yeah. I am, not a physician, but I am trained in these exams, and I am trained in communication, and I'm here to help you work through some of these things and practice. So when you do get into the real world, you'll at least have had some run-throughs in a low-stakes way. Yeah. And I think they appreciate that, because we can then kind of relate in those moments. What I think the terminology that hit me was when we were being trained by the physicians to do the exams, they would say certain things like palpate this particular part of the body. And I'll be like, can you tell me what palpate means? Like, I'm not sure what that word is. So learning some of the anatomical terminology, and when we were referring to different muscle groups or neurological terminology, that would be like the first times where I would be like, cool, I need to ask you a question, or I'm going to look this up later just to make sure that when I repeat it back, I know what I'm saying.
Right.
So those would be the moments where I think in the training, I was really coming face to face with that culture and that language.
Gotcha. And so I find your personality really intriguing, because I've been surrounded by a bunch of creative folks my whole life, and I feel like the ones that are fully artistic, it's not very common that you find someone who also has a technical, scientific half of their mind, and you went that extra step. Do you find that's unique in your world, that you appreciate the science and the art of culture?
I don't know if it's super unique, because I think a lot of the people that I know in the theater world, that's the art form that I specialize in, there are so many parts of it where you're required to have like a really good math background. And, if we're thinking like science and STEM in general, I would put math in there. And I never realized it either until you start working in like scale, for example. You're building a miniature set that you want someone to look at as a model and then reproduce, in human size. And to be able to do your measurements and designing through that mathematical scale and proportionality requires a lot of thought and practice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or design work in general, where you're, measuring and building and trying to make these things in the sizes that you're hoping for. And then you see them up in real life and you realize, oops, I did this all 6 inches too short or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
So there's that, or like ratios when you have something on your computer you've designed that you want to project, and how that grows when you project it through video. So there's like all of this math in that technical sense that I feel like a lot of artists have. And as I've gotten to know more folks working in STEM, and particularly more like geosciences or space sciences or even medical sciences, the way that they think about creativity in their world is not so different from how artists think about creativity. And I always found that part to be really exciting, because when I could get a STEM professional to really articulate why something was really exciting to them, or what the creative aspect was in this particular experiment, or how they got to where they did in their research, it's just the same. It's the same kind of approach and the same view of the world, and the same tools I think are being used. It's just the disciplines are so different. One's a little more objective versus one that's a little more subjective, So yeah, it's really interesting in that way. And I find a lot of artists that I know and work with are kind of technically minded in that way.
Wow. That's such a great point, that you both disciplines are creative in their own way. I think that's a real insight there. And how do you leverage that insight? How do you make people leverage that so that their points and their presentations are more easily understood? Is there a way that you use that insight?
Sometimes it's about the big whys. And if you can get someone to articulate that thing sometime, whether it's like why they do what they do versus why this project will have impact, then you start to really see like excitement and passion in a person start to move toward the front.
Right.
And I think when that starts to happen, you really see the authenticity in the person. When that starts to happen, that's when I really see like, oh, that's who you are. And if you can bring that part of yourself to a presentation, then I feel like the world is your oyster, because you're so comfortable and confident, because you're being yourself, talking about the things that you love and trusting you can pull any of it forward when you need it.
Right.
So when you're faced with these like moments of uncertainty or worry, you have this like foundational confidence to be able to still move forward with the goal that you have for that presentation. And all of it, I think, really stems from that authenticity and that why.
So what I'm hearing is you say that connecting with that spark of passion that people have around their topics or their disciplines is really the seed, the foundation for confidence. Would you agree with that?
I think in my experience, yes. I find that for myself, certainly.
I love that. Yeah. And so what do you think buries that in the people you're working with? I mean, some folks, of course, are going to tap into that more easily, but do you find that there are cultural beliefs in industries or disciplines that they need to act a certain way and they bury that? I see you nodding. So yeah, talk to me about that.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. And you said it so perfectly. Cultural norms in so many of these situations of what an academic should and shouldn't do, as I put up my air quotes, I think is a big part of what like beats people out of stepping forward in a different way or thinking about it as a change in that kind of presentation culture. And, you know, the Alda Center isn't saying it outright that we're here to change the culture. But I'm
saying that, but they should start saying that. Yeah.
But I think, you know, to your point, Mike, like what you're trying to do here with this podcast is that exact idea. And I think, you know, this rigid approach where we often talk about like, you know, these giant ideas, but then there's like so much background and, you know, we never quite get to like sometimes the big why of it all or why it matters to me as an audience member. We're told that slides need to be a particular way. We're told that papers need to be a particular way. And for certain audiences, yes, those things work really great. And if we're trying to get our work past the academics, you know, often I feel like academics are just talking to other academics and who's reading these papers, but other academics. I think the work is too important for it to just stay siloed like that. And I think the only way for us to get out of those silos is to find these modes of communication that feel more authentic, more confident, more that person. So we're kind of pushing past these things. And maybe we're starting our presentation for 200 people with questions for the audience first to gauge their level of understanding of the topic area before you even begin, because that will tell you everything you need to know about where to start or how far back you need to go to then get them up to the level that you need them to be at. So then you can continue on moving forward. And it's just small, simple things like that. But I do think that if you're confident in the material and what you know and why you're doing it, then you can start to be like a little more free in the mode of presentation or style of presentation and maybe do things in a way that isn't necessarily expected in a conference setting or, you know, whatever the case may be. And, and I do think that,
I'm just echoing what you're saying. That's so important. And I think that transformation of the presentation culture in a company is so important because I have a theory that we have a double whammy happening in a lot of the boardrooms and the companies and the organizations out in the world, that when speakers are allowed to speak at a highly technical level to an audience that isn't knowledgeable in that language of their culture, that it does two harmful things to us as a society. Number one, it creates a fear in the room. Well, I don't understand what that speaker is saying, so I don't want to question what that speaker is saying. And then that speaker is misserved because that speaker then thinks, well, they didn't have any questions. They must totally understand what I'm saying. And the second part of the whammy is that audience member now goes away and has this fear. Gosh, my topic doesn't seem as complex, or I don't have a full understanding on the neurodynamics of the human brain, so I don't want to become foolish. I don't want to look foolish in front of, so it fuels that imposter syndrome that I think a lot of speakers suffer under, instead of what you were saying earlier in understanding where your passion comes from and really just sitting in who you authentically are and knowing that that's enough, you know, and then speaking at a human level comes from that confidence. Wonderful insights, Josh. I'm loving this discussion. I think that that this kind of work is so valuable. I mean, would you agree with that? That do you feel really excited about this kind of work with the clients that you work with?
I do. I think it is valuable. I am excited by it. And for those things that you just articulated, in that kind of boardroom scenario, what we don't want is to cultivate a culture of making people feel less than if they don't understand something.
Yes, right.
And as speakers or leaders of a communication, I think it's imperative, if you want people to know about that passion or why this work you're doing is important, is to be able to meet people where they are. And that's a big part of what we do at the Alda Center, and why I really enjoy it is you're leaning into the improv aspect of it. So that's like where the Alan Alda part comes in, right? Alan Alda was an American actor, for people that don't know, on a TV show called MASH. And his background and a lot of his training came from this very famous improv teacher called Viola Spolin. And again, for people that aren't familiar, improvisation is kind of this act of collaborating with someone else in the moment and creating something. And there are lots of rules around improv and principles that really make it work. But Alan thought if he could take the things that he knew really worked well in improv and apply them to science communication, which is the field I work in, then maybe we could find ways where it could be more empathic. You're thinking about the audience more.
Right.
And then you're adaptable and flexible. So that's the improv part. You're able to adjust based on who's in front of you or what happens, like facial expressions that you're seeing.
Body language, facial expressions.
Body language, exactly. Yeah. If someone's in their phone or someone's asleep or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And what do you do with that information? Because that's a gift. Everything in improv is a gift, they say, right? Like every offer is a gift. Every mistake is a gift. There it is for you to take. And what can you do when you notice these, like body language cues or facial expressive cues or a question back to you or whatever it might be, to then adjust and keep going with what you want to say, but maybe being a little bit more flexible on how you say it to meet that person on the other side of the communication. And when people are really doing that, then, I think the world has changed, right? Maybe your project gets funded by Congress, or maybe the town board passes the law that it helps protect the environment, or someone changes their behavior and quits smoking because you're articulating why it is something that might be helpful to them.
And on the day-to-day level, you could get your team members to just truly comprehend what you've told them, and you don't have to over-explain. You don't have to keep coming to the table with further instruction because you've done such a great job that first time. And then they know you're not this high and mighty expert that they can't approach if they do have follow-up questions. Yeah, wonderful. Now, so let's back up a little. How did you discover the Alda Center? So you were doing that medical program. Mm-hmm. Then you had a 20-year gap. Is that what I heard? And then you found the Alda Center. How did that happen?
Yeah, basically that 20 years was, my career in theater. I was working for children's theaters and then Shakespeare companies. I'm a union actor with Actors Equity. I started producing. I started directing. I was a teaching artist for many years. I taught college. I went to grad school. I then became a puppeteer. I started. I know. That's like
I saw that on your bio. I wanted to ask you about that a little bit, but we'll get back to that. All right.
And then 2019 or so, I was kind of full time. Still theater work, but a lot of theater work. If you're not working for like a 10-month contract, like I did way in the past. You're gigging around and trying to fill your time as an independent contractor, which can be hard. And I was looking for a teaching job, had one in the theater, but it was an adjunct job. So not a lot of like security. And this job posting came up at Stony Brook for the Alan Alda Center for Communicating Science. They were looking for lecturers in improv. And I thought, holy moly, this job was meant for me.
Right.
So I looked into it more, and they were looking for people with STEM backgrounds and technical backgrounds, and to be able to work with them. And I thought, holy moly, this again is the job meant for me. So I put forth my application, and I was very persistent, and I really emailed the right people. I would check in a lot. I was finally invited for an interview. And it was like a part interview, and then also come in and teach something for us. And then they kind of observed you teaching. So I really appreciated that part of it, almost like an audition, And then, they were like, okay, well, we'll be making some decisions. And I got another job offer, but I really wanted this Alda job. And I kind of kept checking in via email, like, hey, just want to know when you might make your decision. Thanks, to eventually being like, hey, I'd love to know because I have this other job that's starting tomorrow, and
Please don't let me take this other job.
Yeah, I would rather work for you.
Right.
And, as I was driving to that other job, I got a phone call saying, you're hired. Can you start next week? So I was like, yes, I will. And I have a difficult phone call to make right now. But, I think what is lovely about that story is people are probably like, oh, wow, you bailed on this job, Josh. That's lame. And it's like, well, actually, what was lovely about it is the job that I was going to take, they knew all of this all along, that I was looking for something more secure and that I had applied for the job. And then when I got the job, I called and I was like, hey, I know I'm supposed to start today, but this thing came up. And they're like, that's what you were meant to do, Josh. And it's okay. And don't worry about it. And I really appreciated that because, again, I think I was able to be authentic with them. I was able to be myself with them and communicate to them all of the things that meant something to me as I was kind of trying to find this next stage in my life. So, I guess I'm just trying to tie it all back to this idea of what I think really works well is find that authenticity and find that confidence. And then you're communicating, I think, from that place, and people
that
will respond to you well.
Because a lot of friction in the world, I think, happens because I was set to believe X, and you pulled the rug out from under me. You weren't truthful with me. And so, and that's a wonderful story about how being transparent and authentic along the way already set the expectations so that when you said, hey, by the way, that job I've been talking about, they called, you got a compassionate response. Cool story. So now you got the job there, and what was the training like? Was it intense? Was it interesting?
Both of those things. It was intense and interesting. I was made to learn this 2-day curriculum that we have that is 8 hours. And basically they were trying to train me up pretty quickly. So I started in March of 2019. The semester was ending in May of 2019. So I had just a couple of months to learn the curriculum, start to teach parts of it in person with a trainer, a mentor teacher kind of there giving me feedback. Until then, I could teach a larger part of it until I was teaching, one whole thing by myself. So the steps that they used to train me, I thought were really useful and great. Lots of practice, lots of me just running lines, learning this manual and learning how to instruct these exercises and trying to memorize it and then try it in real time, and having my notes maybe by my side or little cards that I could take a peek at, just to make sure, one, I was getting it right, but also staying on track, and all things that they were totally fine with me doing until now. I've done it for 5 years at this point, so it's all second nature. And it's that thing where I was mentioning to you earlier, when you're really into the thing and you really are finding what you like about it, then it's so ingrained and you learn all of it so well. It takes practice, right? It takes lots of practice. But with that, then comes this confidence to be oh, wow. I know in a classroom setting now, when people are going to feel a particular way about this, or the possibility they could about this, and how we would handle it, how we open up the discussion, how we really make and prioritize the experience of the participants. Again, it's something that, when I first started, I just wanted to like, quote unquote, get it right, which is, I think, what so many people think about when they're trying anything new.
Yeah.
And now that I've gotten past that point, I really then got to the point where things are, the curriculum is interesting because we're always changing it, always designing it, always taking feedback and incorporating it and trying to make it more user-friendly, I guess, student-friendly.
Okay.
So that is like always really interesting and exciting to me. Best practices in all of the ways that we want to make, in-person trainings feel that way, to then designing new curriculum. So that's always interesting to me, is how do we make the same sort of ideas work for climate communications or development professionals who work with STEM professionals and have to translate the work, or for forensics experts who communicate in courtroom settings. So really narrow, but also like really interesting because you can get so hyper specific with what the curriculum can do to help the participants find something that could be useful to them in that discipline or that context. So
wow. Okay. So that's really interesting to me that the curriculums are that thoroughly designed, because on the other hand of the way I work with clients, I encourage people to first ask some questions of the audience. What are you hoping to learn? What's the environment? What's the challenges that you're overcoming? So do you do some of that also to try to customize and be more audience centric for the group that you're actually teaching?
Very much. The workshops themselves are hyper experiential, maybe more so than a lot of people imagine them to be before they get in the room, and then they're faced with it and they're like, oh my God.
Wait, don't go by that, because I'm fascinated by that. Working with these technical folks, do you trot out the word improv, and do their faces drain of color and they start shaking? Yeah. Yes. Oh my gosh.
And we try to approach it really carefully because for that particular response reason. And a lot of it is about how we're applying it. So we're very quick to say, we're not here to turn you into actors. We're not here to make you roll around on the floor in funny costumes and do silly things. Right. And we're never going to ask you to come up by yourself to do something.
Oh, that's great.
But rather, as a group, I'm going to give you some instructions for an exercise as best as you can. Engage in it. If you need accommodations, we'll make them. And then after you experience it, we're going to ask you reflection questions to find out what you're taking away from it or not, and how it applies or not to your work as a communicator. And that to me is the most exciting part, is because they then are bringing their experience that they just had, but also the wealth of it before the workshop, to this reflection. Yeah. And then we're able to really pull things apart and help people kind of understand when certain scenarios or topics or skills are brought up, how we can make them best apply to that particular person or that particular group or for a particular audience. So everything we do is built in this particular way. So that's like the improv part again, where I'm really guiding people through a safe experiential exercise and then debriefing it as a group together. And then that is paired with message design and social science research. So everything that we do when we design this curriculum come from a lit review beforehand. We really try to find out like what the field needs, what we're finding out from colleagues. A needs assessment happens. And then based on that information, and then we start to like figure out what skills we want to work on, and then what exercises might address these skills. Then how we like scaffold it in a way that it creates an experience that grows and blooms, and feels like you're really progressing through something, especially if we're going to take your time for 8 hours. We want to make sure that it feels...
You get something out of it, right?
Useful, yeah. So a lot of it is like really methodical in the approach, and really considered and practiced a lot. We always practice our stuff too with our faculty members and other faculty kind of within our School of Communication and Journalism. So we can get feedback from them about what's working, what's not, what questions we have about the design of the curriculum, in the hopes that we're creating the best learning experience possible for participants.
Right. And so once you develop a curriculum, say around climate change, do you then advertise it or share it to the world and hope that organizations reach you? Or is there a proactive arm of the Alda Center that then goes out and looks for organizations in climate change? How does that work?
It's a little bit of both.
Really?
It's a little bit of both.
Okay.
For a long while, the center kind of was working on relationships that Alan had, but then also other members of the faculty had with other organizations. But, when you have Alan's name on something, people tend to move toward it.
Right,
So
right.
I think that was really helpful for the first decade or so of the center. Now I think we're starting to get a little bit more proactive in trying to find clients that we think would benefit from some of this work or could, or groups that we'd want to partner with to design some curriculum, whether it's a university or another educational institution or organization, research institution, where we feel like there's a pairing there where this like special sauce of like improv experiential learning can really give them something different from, a lecture-based approach.
Gotcha. So I can see the passion as you speak about the work you're doing. You seem to really love it. Why do you think an organization like the Alda Center is so necessary in our culture?
Because communication undergirds everything.
Yeah.
If you can't communicate about the thing, then I don't think anything changes. If we can't clearly communicate an instruction or a need or an injustice, how does anything progress? So I think it's such a basic thing. I mean, we've all learned it in our interpersonal relationships and modes of communication that work well and don't with the varying people that we encounter in our lives, that works professionally in the work that we do. But I think it also works culturally and societally and politically and, on and on and on. But if we can't clearly articulate what it is that we want people to understand, I just don't think there's progress. Nothing changes, nothing moves forward.
Something that I think about a lot when I consider the work that you're doing is, I think now more than ever, with how many folks can go off half-cocked with a little bit of information, the walls between academia and science and the everyday opinion are they seem to be fading. So I think now more than ever, it's so important for folks who really have deep knowledge on these topics like climate change and neurodivergency or whatever it is, that they are able to articulate it in a compelling, open way, in a common language, so that more people find it accessible and share the proper, vetted, researched information. Would you agree with that?
I would. And, I think the other thing that I would say too is like encouraging people to say, I don't know, when they don't know, Amen.
Amen. Because I say that a million times a week. It's okay to walk into a room and not have that answer. Oh my gosh, if I could give one gift to everybody I interact with, it's to give them the release of that burden of knowing everything. It's okay. And people will respect you more. Yeah, exactly.
Truly. Because I think that's where the danger starts to happen is you start to get to a point where the limit of your knowledge is reached. Mm-hmm. And then you start to hyperbolize or opinionate or whatever, right? And that might not be actually what the thing is. So when you get to that point, first noticing, I think so many people do this and they don't notice that they're doing it.
Right.
But if you can notice it and then be like, oh, actually, I'm not sure about this next part of this. So I don't know. Do you know more about this? Or maybe I'm going to go do some work and then I'll come back to you about this.
Let me go check with my team or let me go check with another expert.
Exactly.
I saw a funny meme online that said, let's normalize saying that you don't know enough about this topic to talk about it. And I think the more of us that do that, the more of us we'll become more patient and wait for an answer or go research an answer before we do that pontification that you were talking about. Yeah,
right,
exactly.
right. Or hopefully that leads to less misinformation.
Yeah. So now, Josh, you've worked with a lot of technical experts. Would you say that you found a common thread, 2 or 3 challenges that technical speakers tend to stumble over?
Yeah, one, not necessarily understanding who the audience is that they're speaking to.
Right. Yeah.
I think that is, for us at the Alda Center, a thing that we really try to get people just to think more about. Who is the audience? How can you think of them as a partner? In improv, you're working with another person. Same with a musician that's doing, improv music, right? You are on stage with people that you want to look good with you. And if you can prioritize that idea, which is a great rule of improv, is how do you make your partner look good? Then I think then a better way to approach what they might need when you communicate to them. So knowing your audience is a common thing that I think happens, and people just don't think about it as much.
Yeah.
And then the second part, I would say, another challenge is the goal of the communication.
Oh, okay.
And again, at the Alda Center, we think of goal in a different way. I think if you ask someone, what's your goal of this presentation? And it's like, I want to tell people something, or I want to do this. And that is a speaker-centered goal.
Right.
And what we ask people to think about in this kind of audience-centric way is, what is a goal that you want the audience to think, feel, or do after the communication? So action-oriented items. I want them to think that my work is important. I want them to feel alarmed about this particular thing I'm talking about. I want them to go ask a question of their congressperson later. Whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Think, feel, do goals, right? And there's short-term and there's long-term ones. And they, change accordingly, and especially with the context and length of presentation, et cetera, et cetera. But having a goal that's audience-based, I think, then really changes your approach, so then you can present yourself in a way, or the work in a way, where you can hopefully guide people toward that goal, which is feeling alarmed or whatever it is, right? So audience goal, I think, are like 2 big challenges that we often face. And then once you get to those 2 things, mostly everything else then can be adjusted and changed.
Yeah.
But the big one that I would say is when we work with visuals, oftentimes I think these visuals are so jam-packed with information and words, especially.
Yep.
And as much as we think that this is true, it's not. Audiences can't read and listen at the same time.
Right.
And no matter what you're trying to do, in particular, if it's very technical, the more info you have on that slide that you want people to be reading while you're also speaking at the same time, the person can't follow. And that's just an overwhelm of information. So what we always try to get people to think about is, what is the minimum you can put on a slide so they're listening to you? Because otherwise it would be a recording and you wouldn't have to be there in person.
Yeah.
But
and I find the perfect litmus test when you're designing a slide is to think about what the point of the slide is. I mean,
yes.
One of my favorite writers on presentation, Gar Reynolds, he talked about thinking about the point of a chart. If your point of a chart is to show the discrepancy in hunger between the U.S. and the most populous country that has hunger, then just show U.S. against that one other country. This setting isn't about showing, like you said, being speaker-centric. It's about what does the audience need to know in order for them to accomplish their goal and help you accomplish your goal, right?
Yeah, very much.
Yeah.
A compelling visual can sometimes be just very simple, and you're there to be able to make that make sense for us, or relatable, or
right. You're the expert in the room, and you should be guiding folks through the information. And it's frustrating sometimes because visuals can add such an emotional impact, like a beautiful set behind an actor. It can make you feel like you're on a cold street in England. But by the same token, it can also create fear in the speaker. Oh my God, I've got all this stuff to get through, and I don't want to forget anything. And it also creates a fear in people putting together presentations. Oh no, here he comes again. He's got all these slides, and he's going to want us to, help him with it. So remove the fear by getting simple.
Yeah, simple. Less is more, and just not also making sure you're not using your slides as notes.
Yeah, exactly.
Which I think is a thing that a lot of people do, where they talk to the slides.
Yeah.
You'll see this, and I'm here, and they're gesturing toward the screen and looking at it, and it's like, no. Like, we're out here. Like, let us look at that thing. You know what you have. Glance at it for sure, but try not to fall in that trap of talking to it.
Yeah, I like to tell people to use them as visual touch bases, visual milestones to keep you on track. Okay, this slide I'm going to talk to you about X, Y, and Z. So the visuals should remind you that the point of this slide, and then you can talk to it. If you're turning around for all the minutia, forget it. You're lost because you've lost your presence in the room, and then your slide becomes the expert.
Yeah, right, exactly, right. And we're so trained in our lives when a screen is there to look at it. And if you want someone to be focused on you, sometimes it's just being really specific about how and when you're using the visual. And, one of the best things that I have to teach people is there's this B button in your PowerPoint or your MacBook Keynote presentation software called Blackout. And if you hit B, your screen goes away, and then people are looking at you. And I think that can be such a powerful thing to take attention. And I think about it in the way of theater. Presentations in a way are theater. And if we can use the same tools that you would in a theater presentation, because similarly, audience is going to look at a big screen that glows and is bright any chance you put it up. But if you want them to focus on like a moment of drama someplace else on the stage, or an image or whatever the case may be, you have to guide their attention to it. And we can control that through a presentation. And I think that goes for academic presentations as well, as how can we take from these other art forms and really kind of guide the audience's experience to bring them to where we want them to go and focus on the things we want them to focus on. So then we can kind of deliver this thing to achieve that goal that we have set for the presentation.
Yeah, and I think the value in having folks with a background in theater doing this work is because you can bring to the table things like movement. I mean, it seems so simple, but so many folks will plant themselves behind the podium or at the corner of the room and talk to their slide way over there, even though the bar graph they just built is way on the other side, instead of just strolling over there and pointing and saying, okay, see here, this is a decline. It's amazing how you can transform a speaker's confidence and the comprehension of the audience just by guiding a speaker to move and demonstrate and point out things. Like you were saying, taking that spotlight and shifting it for the audience and saying, this is where I need you to pay attention right now. Great stuff, Josh. This conversation is going so awesome, and I think I could talk to you for 7 hours. There are a couple of things that I want to touch on. One thing I noticed when I was going through your website was Star Wars Shakespeare. Now, I'm a huge Star Wars nerd, and that immediately brought in my focus. But it made me wonder, is there something about taking, be it technical information, an old sci-fi movie that everyone knows so well, and removing it from context and delivering it in a different way that is valuable? Does that bring extra comprehension, extra value? Have you found that in your work?
Yes, very much so. And, to take either of those two forms, 400-year-old texts or, what is that, 40-year-old film at this point?
Right.
But to be able to bring those two things together, they're one, crossing audiences, which I think is really exciting.
Right.
But two, it's kind of shining a light on something in a new way where people maybe never quite considered that this would be a possible way to interpret this particular thing. And then more creativity is starting to happen. So like, mashups people have done for forever now, but to be able to mash up two things that you think is particularly interesting, I think can go a really long way, and odds are audiences will probably think it's particularly interesting because no one thought to put jelly and peanut butter together until they did. And then they were like, oh my gosh, this is the best thing that's ever happened. And Shakespeare and Star Wars works well in so many ways. It's heightened language in both senses of the word. It's heightened spectacle. It's scenery and props or video and projections, depending on how you choose to interpret it. But I think it can really make for bringing more audiences into a thing that you like in a different way, because I think it opens access or creates interest or curiosity or wonder. And I think those things are so useful.
Yeah, and it goes back down to that old school way of thinking about the professional culture, and I'd love for folks like us to encourage people to risk being a little bit silly, to take some common popular culture and say, this AI is like the Ariana Grande of AI, and this language model is more like, the Dolly Parton of the AI world, and using those in a presentation, because it's those metaphors and those connection that does make it more wildly acceptable to an audience or understandable.
100%.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
100%.
All right. I want to let you go, but I always ask this question of my guests. What are you personally afraid of when you speak, and how do you overcome it?
Oh, gosh. What am I afraid of? I guess sometimes it's like the imposter syndrome, like never leaves me, Yeah. And I think a little bit of it is, wow, here I am at NASA, at Johnson Space Center, with some of the most incredible minds working on some of the most incredible things. And I am about to talk to you about improv. And, what I have to remember is that I do belong there and I do have expertise, and it's just different from the people that are across from me. So I remind myself of that a lot in some of those high pressure moments when I'm working with Nobel Prize winning STEM physicians or scientists. It's like, right, they also need something or else they wouldn't be here. What can you do to meet them where they are? And odds are they'll probably do the same and meet you where you are, so you can accomplish this thing together. And I think that's the biggest thing, is it's not just me, right? When I'm really scared, I think it's just me, but it's not. Right. I am there with them, and that, I think, tends to make me feel a lot better.
That's great. Great words of advice there, Josh. Thank you so much for being on this podcast with us. I think you've shared so many nuggets that I think the audience will have a lot to take from this. Is there a place where folks can learn more about you and connect with you?
Sure. If you're interested in more work with the Alan Alda Center for Communicating Science, you can go to aldacenter.org. And find out all the different offerings that we have. And then if you're interested in me as a human being, Josh Rice, you can find out more at joshriceprojects.com.
Awesome. Thanks again, Josh. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. I really appreciate it, Mike. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.